Lecture 10. How God's anger manifests itself upon his own children sinning. Jeremiah 50, verse 20. In those days and at that time the iniquity of Judah shall be sought for, etc. Let us in the next place consider the particulars wherein God's eye of anger doth manifest itself upon his own children, if sinning against him. The effect of his wrath may be considered in that which is temporal or spiritual or eternal. In all these God's anger doth bring forth in one respect or other. For the temporal objects take notice of these particulars. First, when they sin against God, they are involved in the common and ordinary afflictions which do usually accompany sin in the wicked. Thus in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 30, for their unworthy receiving of the sacrament, and some even of those were godly, as appeareth in verse 32, many were weak and sickly. Weak were such as did languish, and sickly is more, such as had diseases on them. Now these were plagai, strokes from God, and therefore came from his anger for their sins. Though the Lord's Supper consists in a twofold bread, the one earthly for the body, the other heavenly, the bread of life for the soul, yet both body and soul did miserably decay, because of unworthy receiving. This table, being, as Chrysostom said, mensa equilarum, not graecularum, food for eagles, not gyas, and therefore those children who have fainting diseases upon them, and do secretly eat salt, oatmeal, etc., though they have never such excellent food at their father's table, yet thrive not, but look pale and consuming. So it was with the Corinthians by reason of their corruptions. They inclined to death, though they fed on the bread of life. Now that these bodily diseases are the common issue and fruit of sin, appeareth in Leviticus 26, verse 16, as well as Deuteronomy 28, verse 22. The grace, therefore, of justification can give no supersedes to any disease that shall arrest a believer offending, but are the wicked in consumptions, agues, fevers for their sins. So are the godly. Yea, the people of God are in these calamities before the wicked. Amos 3, verse 2. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities. I have known you, that is, acknowledged you for mine. See what that is. Exodus 19, verse 5. A peculiar treasure unto me above all people. The Hebrew word signifieth that which is dear and precious, and to be desired of all. This is aggravating by what followeth, for all the earth is mine, that is, seeing there are so many nations in the world over whom I have full power and dominion, how great is God's goodness in taking you for his above others. Now mark the prophet's reason. Because I have done this, therefore I will visit you for your iniquities. For to all your other wickedness you add an ungrateful heart. So there is another place, 1 Peter 4, verse 17, where God is said to judge them before others, and this hath been a great offense to the godly. It is time, that is, a seasonable opportunity by the decree and appointment of God, for judgment, that is, chastisements for former sins, which are called judgments, because they are public testimonies and manifestations of God's anger against sins, and are to put the godly in mind of their sins. Only it is rima, not ata rima in the original. The word is used even of the godly, 1 Corinthians 11, verses 31 and 32, as well as 1 Peter 4, verse 6. By the house of God he meaneth the true members of the church. And whereas he saith, it begins in them, he thereby intimates that the godly in this life are more exposed to afflictions for sin than the wicked are. And this made David and Jeremy so expostulate with God in this manner, so that the godly in their afflictions ought to say, as that widow of Sarepta in 2 Kings 17:18, this is to call my sin to remembrance. It is thought the apostle, though he doth not expressly mention a place, yet he takes this out of the doctrine of the Old Testament. For so God did begin first with his people, Isaiah 10, verse 12, Jeremiah 25, verses 17 and 18, as well as Ezekiel 9, verse 6, begin at my sanctuary, Ezekiel 21, verse 4. There God in public calamities maketh no difference between the righteous and the ungodly. Now this is so great that the apostle saith, the righteous is hardly saved. The word malus is used of those things that with much labor are brought about. Acts 14, verse 18, as well as Acts 27, verse 7. These tribulations are so great that they almost destroy the godly themselves. See also James 5, verse 13. Is any sick? Where the godly man is supposed to be sick, and the cause, if he hath committed sin, that is, such sins as were the causes of that disease, they shall be forgiven him. So that even justified persons afflicted by diseases are to inquire what sins the Lord would humble them for, and to labor that the sickness of the body be the sanctified occasion of the health of the soul. Number 2, God's anger is seen in bringing extraordinary and unusual calamities upon them because of their sins, so that they have strange punishments, which even the wicked do many times escape. Jonah, who endeavored to fly from God's face, and that he might easily have done by Antinomian doctrine, with what a prodigious judgment was he overtaken. Jonah 2. The prophet calls it the belly of hell, and how deeply his soul was afflicted under that punishment appeareth in what he saith. His soul fainted within him, and he concluded he was cast out of God's sight. He that voluntarily ran from God's presence doth now bewail that he is cast from it. He makes the whale's belly an house of prayer, and this came up to God in his holy temple, that is, heaven. You see by this that God prepareth strange judgments, sometimes for those that offend him, though his children. So in that 1 Corinthians 11, verse 30, when he saith that many of the Corinthians were dead for their unworthy receiving, it is to be understood of an immature and untimely death. They did not live out to the term of those days, that according to natural causes they might have done. So that it is the same with being cut off in the Old Testament, Exodus 12, verse 15. Whosoever did eat the Passover with leaven was to be cut off from Israel. Therefore even godly men may procure to themselves untimely deaths, and may provoke God to cut them off in the midst of their years. Third, yea further, God may not only afflict them in an extraordinary manner, but even strike them with sudden death, and that while their sins are upon them. It will not instance in Ananias and Sapphira, nor in Nadab and Abihu, though some thought charitably of them. We have a clear instance in Uzzah, wherein God's anger was so apparent, by striking him suddenly dead, that the thing is said to displease David. 2 Samuel 6, verse 7. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and he smote him for his errors. His error was not because he was not a Levite, for it is plain he was, but because they put the ark upon a new cart, whereas they should have carried it upon their shoulders. Although it is thought the carrying of the ark was limited only to the Levites that were the sons of Kohath, and that no other Levite might touch the ark, which if so, then it was a second offense against the law, because he touched it. And indeed this seemeth to be the proper cause, because it was a personal fault of Uzzah, whereas the putting of it on a new cart was the error of others besides him. Thus Uzzah in his very sin is stricken dead. You have likewise another sad example of Eli, lege historiam, ne scias historia, 1 Samuel 4, verse 18. Because he failed in the measure of zeal about the reproof of his sons, therefore he fell backward and broke his neck. Eli manifested his pious affections in submitting to the hand of God, punishing, and in being more affected with the public calamity than his own private. Yet this is his sad, tragical end. Fourth, God's anger doth not limit itself to them only, but it reacheth even to their children, and to those that are dear to them. Thus David's child is stricken dead for his sin, and thus Eliah's daughter gives up the ghost with sad grief. The family both of David and Eli have remarkable calamities following them, and all because of their sins. When any of Eli's posterity shall be forced to crouch for a morsel of bread, this is a memento to Eli's sin. Here a man may see the seed of the righteous begging bread, but for the parent's sin. Therefore that of David, Psalm 36, must not be understood universally, that this calamity may the more wound his heart. God telleth him what he will do to his house after his death, if any were left alive. It should be like that indulgence to Cain, to carry up and down a token of God's displeasure. And if you ask, for how long should this anger of God endure, 1 Samuel 3, verse 14, his iniquity must not be purged away from that house forever. Well may the Scripture say that whosoever heareth this judgment of God, his ears shall tingle. But this instance, how watchful should godly parents be, lest for their sins committed a curse should cleave to the family of many generations. I acknowledge these calamities as they fell upon Eli, a godly man, so they were wholesome medicines and fatherly corrections. But as they came on his wicked children or posterity continuing in wickedness, so they were strictly and properly punishments. Lastly, these temporal evils will reach even to the public church and state wherein they live, so that the sins of godly men may help to pull down public judgments. Thus it was with Hezekiah, for his unthankfulness and pride, there was wrath upon Judah and Jerusalem, 2 Chronicles 32, verse 25. So David's sin in numbering the people, it was the death of many thousand in Israel. For Eli's sin, the Israelites are slain in the army, and the ark is taken. Hence you have Eli, Daniel, and Ezra joining themselves to the number with others who made public confession of their sins upon days of humiliation. It is therefore a cursed and secure opinion that saith, the godly, when they keep fast days, do it not because they have any sins that God punisheth, but because of wicked men. The Scripture doth manifest the contrary. And the holiest men living do bring some sparks and firebrands to increase the wrath of God, and therefore they ought to bring their buckets for the quenching of it. The aggravation of this anger will appear if you consider what kind of sins they have been, for which God hath been so sore displeased, and in them enumerated, or instanced in, you may perceive, they were the Beelzebub sins, the firstborn of iniquities. Uzzah failed only in the order of God, God had appointed. What he did was out of care and a good intention, yet the Lord smiteth him. So Moses was denied entering into the land of Canaan, which was a heavy affliction to him, because he spake unadvisedly with his lips. Commentators are at a loss to find out what his sin was. So David's sin in numbering the people is disputed wherein the transgression lay. Eli's heavy judgment that came so frequently upon one upon another were for want of that measure of zeal which should have burnt within him. O therefore consider that God doth not only see sins that are mountains, but that are molehills comparatively. He doth not only see the beams, but the motes that are in us. He doth not only take notice of our mire and vomit, if we return to that, but of the least spot and wrinkle. How deeply mayest thou humble thyself under every religious duty performed by thee. How often do we fail in the manner of a command, as Uzzah in the order. How often out of pride and self-confidence do we number our earthly props and refuges, relying upon them. How unadvisedly are our thoughts and words, now these hairs of sins, as I may so call them, both for number and seeming littleness, are all numbered before God.